A mere mention of The Andy Griffith Show likely gets its iconic theme song whistling away in your head. It's been years since its cancellation, but it has remained in syndication ever since, and it has done a lot better in reruns than it did during its initial run. Because of this, it almost feels like Mayberry was forever immortalized in our collective consciousness. The factors that played a part in the show's cancellation were less about its ratings and more about how Andy Griffith, the series' star, had grown tired of wearing his sheriff's badge. He was more than ready to leave Mayberry behind and set out on a new chapter of his career. It was also becoming increasingly unlikely that viewers would be open to seeing him in any other role. Typecasting is a major problem for television stars. Once the public has you pegged as one particular character, it's almost impossible to shed that persona. Join Facts Verse as we explore some of the other reasons why The Andy Griffith Show was inevitably scrapped. Don Knotts saw his chance to leave and took it. Another reason why Andy chose to pull the plug on the show was the fact his partner in crime, or law enforcement, Don Knotts, already had left. For many fans of the series, it never felt the same after Barney's departure, even though he would occasionally come back for a cameo. Knotts decided to leave the show when he did because he was under the impression it would be coming to an end after its 5th season. Griffith had been talking for years about how he only wanted his sitcom to be a 5-season-long offering. In 1999, Griffith told the Archive of American Television that after Barney was gone and the show had transitioned from black and white into color, it had very little setting it apart from any other sitcom. So he had minimal hesitation about staying true to his word and ending it after season 5. He also told the outlet he wanted to try his wings outside of the confines of the series. But despite the fact he only had ever intended for the show to last half a decade, network execs convinced him to keep it alive for another 3 seasons. It went on to run for 8 seasons before finally going off the air. But when it did eventually come off the air, it left on a relatively soft note, with the last episode being a backdoor pilot for a spin-off series that would prove to be quite popular as well. Hey, if you're enjoying this video so far, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to Factsverse for more, and stick around for more about The Andy Griffith Show. Mayberry's return was received warmly by fans. Andy may have wanted to make a graceful exit from Mayberry, but his fellow cast members weren't quite ready to leave the ideal town behind. Mayberry RFD picked up where The Andy Griffith Show left off, focusing on the town's citizens following the departure of their beloved sheriff. Andy might have left in search of new horizons after getting married to the love of his life, but Mayberry seemed to be here to stay. It would have been easy enough to assume the spinoff was going to crash and burn as a failed experiment that wouldn't resonate with fans. But it ended up being one of the top 10 rated shows on TV for all 3 seasons it was on the air. What led to its cancellation was ultimately the so-called rural purge of the 1970s. The networks back then no longer wanted to feature shows that focused on rural living. They were convinced that shows like The Beverly Hillbillies, Green Acres, and even The Andy Griffith Show were lowbrow. So in an attempt to attract a more educated viewer base, they pulled the cord on several of these shows. The Andy Griffith Show perfectly captured nostalgia. It may have aired during the 60s, but that decade wasn't exactly the vibe that the series gave off. It felt somehow timeless, a throwback to simpler times. While the world was in a state of flux, reckoning with a great number of cultural changes, The Andy Griffith Show never touched on particularly controversial topics. It was a series that was far too lighthearted to tackle touchy themes. Griffith once was quoted saying, "The show felt more like the 30s or some time gone by." The humor and gentle life lessons it exuded all perfectly conveyed this sense of nostalgia that was unmistakable. In many ways, it was a much-desired reprieve from the divisive and polarizing issues trending back during its era. You watched it to take a little 30-minute trip back in time. The sitcom's theme song will forever be in your mind. The theme from Andy Griffith was the perfect lead-in to get us glued to our television sets. But did you know the tune has a name? It was composed by Herbert Spencer and Earl Hagen and is appropriately titled The Fishin' Hole. Some of Hagen's other credits include the themes for shows like I Spy, The Dick Van Dyke Show, and The Mod Squad. He later co-wrote the theme for the comedy western Rango. Spencer and Hagen first worked together on The Danny Thomas Show, but when they sat down and conjured up The Fishin' Hole, that's when they really had their first breakout moment. Spencer had previously earned his credentials working on Broadway musicals and film scores, and eventually he even got a chance to do a collab with the great John Williams. The Fishin' Hole also has a set of lyrics, not that anyone actually knows them. They didn't appear in the opening theme sequence, but Andy himself recorded the words. Andy butted heads with the show's producers. If Andy had his way, there wouldn't have been a mayor of Mayberry. Sheldon Leonard, the series co-creator and executive producer, was the one who made a push to include Mayor Pike or Mayor Stone depending on what season you're watching. Andy didn't want a boss. He wanted all the power and glory of being Mayberry's sheriff and fearless leader without the hassle of having to report to anyone. But beyond that, he had problems with the logistics of the whole deal. A sheriff is a county employee, while mayor is an official who leads a town, not a county. Another problem Andy had with the show was its laugh track. He didn't care for canned laughter, and Don Knotts didn't either. Before coming to Mayberry as its bumbling deputy, Knotts had been a part of a failed show called The Steve Allen Show, and he reportedly told Griffith he believed the show's failure was related to its obnoxious laugh track. Andy wasn't completely opposed to laughter being added, but he wanted it to be natural and organic. Proposed the show would be shown to a live audience, which would be recorded and then played back for broadcast, but apparently that approach would have been difficult to pull off and far too costly for the network to approve. Andy was quite the jokester. Andy was supposed to be the funny guy of the show, not the straight-laced enforcer he became. But since that didn't end up happening, Andy decided to indulge his desire for comedy by playing practical jokes while on set. On occasion, Andy would cut Don Knotts off while trying to speak by clanging a metal can on the floor. There was also reportedly a time when George Lindsay woke up from a mid-afternoon nap to find a bunch of raw meat strewn about his dressing room. Don Knotts was Andy's preferred target. After all, Knotts had quite the reputation of keeping his cool even when pushed to the limits. The final episode was nothing special. The show that forever cemented Andy Griffith and Don Knotts as pop culture icons and launched Ron Howard's career at an early age left primetime TV about as quietly and unassumingly as it arrived. In the finale, Farmer Sam sponsors his old army buddy Mario from Italy to come to Mayberry to help him work on his farm. Unfortunately, Mario also brings along his sister and father without asking Sam for permission. About the time Sam is about to suggest Mario and his family find someplace else to live in a nearby town, Andy comes along and talks Sam into letting the three stay with him. The newbies in town end up falling in love with Mayberry, and the townsfolk take a liking to them as well. Now it's time to hear from you. What was your favorite episode of The Andy Griffith Show? Let us know in the comment section below. And before you go, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to Facts Verse if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content.